I just watched the Monkey movie. That was an absolutely phenomenal film. Like, so funny and so well done. And now I'm gonna let this car drive itself and hopefully not just decide to flip out and kill people.
Around 10 a.m., the Norfolk Police Division responded to a call of a man driving eastbound on 275 with a Watusi bull in his passenger seat.
The officers received a call reference a car driving into town that had a cow in it. They thought that it was going to be, like a calf, something smaller, something that actually fit inside the vehicle.
And the vehicle was big enough. Well, technically.
As a result, the officer performed a traffic stop and addressed some traffic violations that were occurring with that particular situation.
The occupant of the vehicle was identified as Lee Meyer of Neely. The Watusi bull's name was Howdy Doody. He was immediately pulled over by Norfolk Police and they performed a routine traffic stop.
The officer wrote him some warnings. There were some citable issues with that situation. The officer chose to write him a warning and ask him to take the animal back home and to leave the city.
Meyer and Howdy Doody are on their way back home and no one was hurt.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media. guess we'll describe it.
Received some calls about the overnight firings this weekend. We should remind people you were not only the Department of Homeland Security, you were the General Counsel for the Department of Defense. What are you hearing?
First of all, the chainsaw imagery is apt. And the chainsaw is indiscriminate. And if you were serious about going about reducing the size of government, you would do so in a methodical way. You work with OMB, you develop who's essential, who's not, which takes time. You work with Congress. You don't try to do it all in a month. So that's number one. In terms of what's happening at the Pentagon right now, the people I speak to in the community are very, very upset because they believe that this is killing being able to speak truth to power. And General Brown, 3,000 hours flight time in fighter jet, 130 hours combat mission.
Own leadership about how they should be messaging on this. And they're the ones who are being confronted by angry constituents in these town halls.
Pushback. What are you?
Phone, their emails, and be cut off by a president and Elon Musk who are in a ham-handed, incompetent way cutting funding that makes no sense and ultimately won't make a difference on our deficit because the president wants to rack it up to give tax cuts to the wealthiest and create government going. What I want to do...
But you won't help keep it open?
When governments shut down, people get hurt.
Too close to call. Master Holt reporting from Ground Zero as it's being... Folks, let me get in.
Brought over southern Gaza.
It looks like hot lava.
News for the generation of now is NBC News Now.
The NBC News mobile app. Get connected to night from New Orleans.
But even more. Paris's Notre Dame Cathedral.
It's resilience and hope.
Welcome back. The panel is here. Jonathan Martin, Politics Bureau Chief and Senior Political Columnist at Politico. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Melanie Zanona. Former Secretary of Homeland Security Jay Johnson. And Lonnie Chen, a fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. Thanks to all of you for being here. Jonathan, I have to start with you. We are 1 month into the Trump presidency. We have these new poll numbers. We have the pushback that we're seeing to the big cuts at these town halls all across the country. What do you make of this first month?
Well, if the president had taken his mandate as cracking down on the border and trying to reduce the cost of goods, I think he'd be in a lot better shape right now. But like a lot of presidents who misread the results of the polls and their election, he's overreaching, and he's doing so in ways that are invariably going to prompt backlash. Look, the American people love the idea of paring back the federal government, theoretically. But operationally, Kristen, it's a very different story. When you start talking about actual people and their actual jobs and their lives are at stake, you see the kind of clips that we've seen the last week at these town halls. People don't like it. They like the idea of it, not the actual application of it. That's an old axiom in American politics, and I think that's going to put Elon Musk on thin ice.
Yeah, and Mel, we should first of all say welcome to NBC. Welcome to the panel. We're thrilled to have you. He is not waiting for Congress to give him the green light. He's slashing and burning these agencies with Elon Musk. There's been a little bit of speaking out on Capitol Hill, but very little real pushback. What are you hearing from your sources?
Yeah, you're right. Republicans are certainly in the back seat here. They're letting Donald Trump and Elon Musk call the shots. But I will say that behind the scenes, we have started to see some cracks grow. I've been hearing from multiple Republicans, including in really safe conservative seats, telling me privately behind the scenes they're very uncomfortable with the scope and speed of some of these cuts, particularly as they have hit home, impacted some of their own constituents. I think it was a lot easier when it was foreign aid on the chopping block for USAID, but now it's a different story. And I'm also hearing that they're frustrated that they have not received any guidance or communication from the White House or their own leadership about how they should be messaging on this. And they're the ones who are being confronted by angry constituents in these town halls, and they don't know what to say. They want to still be supportive of the Doge mission, but they also want to stand up for their constituents. So this is creating some real headaches for Republicans.
That's a very difficult difficult place to be in, Jay Johnson. Let me turn to you on this, because we've seen some stumbling blocks with the administration firing a whole bunch of people, then saying, oh, wait, we have to rehire some of those people that we fired. You've actually received some calls about the overnight firings this weekend. We should remind people you ran not only the Department of Homeland Security, you were the general counsel for the Department of Defense. What are you hearing?
First of all, the chainsaw imagery is apt. The chainsaw is indiscriminate, and if you were serious about going about reducing the size of government, you would do so in a methodical way. You work with OMB, develop who's essential, who's not, which takes time. You work with Congress. You don't try to do it all in a month. So that's number one. In terms of what's happening at the Pentagon right now, the people I speak to in the community are very, very upset because they believe that this is chilling being able to speak truth to power. And General Brown, 3,000 hours flight time in fighter jet, 130 hours combat mission. The CNO, Admiral Franchetti, was commander of the 6th Fleet. She commanded 2 aircraft carrier groups. On paper, those 2 individuals who the president fired are far more qualified to be chairman of the Joint Chiefs than the one who wants to hire and put in that role. And this is sending a message to the entire community. Shut up, fall in line, don't speak truth to power, just wait out the time until you retire, or you could be fired with 3 hours notice to get out of your government house.
Just stunning to hear that. And Lonnie, of course, this does come against the backdrop, as Mel and J Mart were talking about, of these town halls where you're seeing passions bubble over. What do you make of this moment? Will it resonate to the White House or no?
Look, I think we have to question who some of these folks are in these town halls, right? Some of the reporting has said that these are activists who never liked Donald Trump, who were never in favor of Donald Trump. So, I mean, let's see how this all plays out. Every president wants to expand the scope of executive action, right? George W. Bush, after 9/11, tried to expand the surveillance state. Barack Obama tried to use executive action to legalize a number of undocumented immigrants. Every president wants to push the boundaries. When it comes to reducing the scope and size of government, what we've tried is an incremental approach. That hasn't worked. So this president's saying, let's go further. Let's cut deeper. And it is going to result in people saying, is this the right thing to do? But fundamentally, what President Trump's trying to do is to move the needle in a non-incremental way. And that is going to result in people asking questions. That's where we're at. But in my view, the response we're seeing from the American people, it's got to play out over some period of time. Because federal workers are not a particularly sympathetic group for most Americans.
Right. But the challenge is they're not theoretically in D.C. when they're in Tulsa or Oklahoma City or Norman, like they were for Senator Mark Wayne Mullen. It's a very different story. The most interesting thing I thought he said during the interview was, I don't want to see folks losing their jobs. Well, that's precisely what's going to happen if you go through with these sort of chainsaw-style cuts of federal employees. People don't like it when it starts hitting them when they have skin in the game, which is, I think, why it's been so hard over the years, Lonnie, to actually make any real change in the government, because people don't want to see profound change when it affects them.
TSA at airports, for example.
Well, and the impact of cutting, you know what it's like to run.
Yeah, right. You tried, right? Yeah. How'd that go?
Incidentally, it wasn't just President Obama, it was me too.
Mel, you know, Troy Balderson of Ohio makes the point, hey, this is Congress's job. And yet it doesn't seem like anyone in Congress is standing up to say we're the ones who should have oversight, because technically speaking, we get to decide what gets cut.
Yeah, I've been talking to Republican appropriators who sit on these key committees that are in charge of spending, have said they're okay with Elon Musk and Donald Trump usurping some of their own power and their own purpose. I do think this is going to come to head in the weeks and months ahead, particularly as they're debating government funding. This is going to be a huge question, because Democrats want a commitment that if they're going to agree to fund the government, that Trump and Elon Musk are not going to just ignore it. And right now, Republicans have refused to give them that commitment, so we could be in for a real showdown.
And the Republicans can't criticize Trump, but I'll tell you what, I think Elon's going to start catching some of that fire from them.
Yeah.
All right, well, we will watch it closely, guys. Stand by. We have a lot more to discuss. We do want to note that Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer had committed to appear on the broadcast this morning. Her staff called late Friday to cancel her appearance, citing changes to her schedule. We do hope to have her back soon. When we come back, President Trump is targeting diversity initiatives in the federal government. We look back on how they were once embraced in our Meet the Press Minute, which is next. Stay with us.
More Americans turn to NBC News than any other news organization.
Lester Holt, America's most trusted TV news anchor.
More Americans turn to NBC News than...
With Tom Yamas, streaming weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
Good morning, glad to have you with us. I'm Savannah Sellers.
I'm Joe Fryer, right now on Morning News Now. Rescue teams are out helping people.
Lost drugs. Are we concerned? Is the leader of the Democratic Party right now. Can you guarantee that grocery prices will in fact come?
What this means for
back, President a majority that struck down affirmative action in college admissions. But back in 1978, the Supreme over the next 4 years. Who do you think is the leader of the Democratic Party right now? Can you guarantee that grocery prices will in fact come down? If it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.
Closer to the Gaza border.
With new developments, what's up? What do we know about these chemicals? And should we be super concerned about it or what? Economic policy and what the election means for it. Break it down in English. What this means for people's money.
Welcome back. President Trump has stepped up his pushback against programs promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion. But this effort began well before his return to office a month ago. In 2023, his Supreme Court appointees helped form the conservative majority that struck down affirmative action in college admissions. But back in 1978, the Supreme Court upheld the policy. Civil rights activist Eleanor Holmes Norton joined this broadcast a month later.
How are we going to know when the period is over when we need affirmative action? What will be the criteria?
We'll know because black unemployment won't be twice one in white unemployment. We'll know because there'll be more than 2% black doctors and black lawyers. We'll know because the ghettos won't stand out in poverty while prosperity appears to abound elsewhere. I am one of those who believe that in a single generation, we can in fact get rid of the consequences of 200 years of racial discrimination. But I believe that can happen only if we are willing to pursue very strong remedies now. The lighter the remedies, the more we guarantee that the period of rectification will be drawn out.
And when we come back, 1 month into President Trump's second term, are Democrats holding back in their fight? More with the panel next.
The NBC News mobile app. Get connected to your favorite news shows. For the top stories, breaking news, and live video, download the NBC News mobile app.
More Americans turn to NBC News than any other news organization.
Still to come on the Channel 2 News. Well, the waters are certainly receding now. Still too close to call. Lester Holt reporting from the ground. Going farther.
To have you with us, I'm Savannah Sellers.
I'm Joe Fryer.
When it comes to staying safe online.
These organization.
Lester Holt.
Grocery prices will in fact the leader of the Democratic here. Secretary Johnson, let's start with you. And part of what I was discussing with Senator Booker, which is this idea that some Democrats are really leaning into the idea that they are arguing this is a constitutional crisis already. What do you make of that? Senator Booker didn't necessarily lean into that. He said, let's talk about issues like the economy. What's your take?
reality is that most voters care about price of eggs, price of gas, wait times at airports, TSA. I worry that the phrase constitutional crisis is becoming an overused phrase, crying wolf too often. I believe that when it comes to the matter of the Constitution, that is something that rises above politics. When a president says, I am not going to abide by a court order, that is a true constitutional crisis, because then the system of checks and balances collapses. I know many Republicans, I know many Heritage Foundation Republicans who would agree that that is a constitutional crisis. That transcends politics. And so we need to keep talking about it in those terms, in my view.
Lonnie, what is your take, and what are you hearing when you talk to people? What has the reaction been inside Republican circles to this type of talk? And quite frankly, as President Trump is facing a number of legal challenges all across the country.
Well, look, I agree completely. The notion that we have a constitutional crisis is belied by the fact that you have the courts who are still doing the work that they do. You have Congress, and ultimately the voters are going to cast judgment in the midterm elections in less than 2 years. So what I'm hearing from Republicans is, let's hope Democrats continue to use this argument as opposed to the one that you and Senator Booker have been using around the economy. That ultimately is going to be the more effective argument. The fact that Democrats are leaning into this, I think Republicans are like, great, keep it up, continue that, because that's the shortest way to ensuring you lose in the midterm elections in 26.
Yeah, Lonnie's right. It's such a Washington argument. Before the commercial, you showed the picture, Kristen, of the senator standing in front of the FBI with the Kash Patel logo. That is cutting no ice with any vote, all right? They're not following who's the head of a federal agency, one even as important as the FBI. It's not material to their lives. What's material to their lives? Yes, the cost of goods at the grocery store and the gas station, and yes, they or their families losing a job or a contract because of these indiscriminate cuts in the federal government. That's where this thing matters, and I think that's where Democrats have got to go. They cannot get suckered into talking about norms for the umpteenth time.
But the leadership in Democratic circles right now, they are under so much pressure from their base right now to go up against Donald Trump.
Somehow, some way,
right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's not calling it a constitutional crisis, but there are other pressure points. And who is the base is the other question.
Well, and Secretary Johnson, President Trump seems to enjoy stirring the pot. He posted this week, he who saves his country does not violate any law. Clearly trying to have more of that debate, that argument.
That's just wrong. That's wrong. If a court of law tells you you have violated the law, you've violated the Constitution, the other political branches of government have to abide by that. Otherwise, the system collapses.
There was a really striking moment this week with President Trump. He was having lunch with the governors who were here for the Governors Association meeting. This was with Maine Governor Janet Mills, related to state leaders on compliance with his executive orders. Take a look.
Is Maine here, the governor of Maine?
Down here.
Are you not going to comply with it?
Complying with the state and federal laws.
We are the federal law. Well, you better do it. You better do it. So you better comply, because otherwise you're not getting any federal funding.
See you in court.
Every state. Good. I'll see you in court. I look forward to that. That should be a real easy one. And enjoy your life after governor, because I don't think you'll be in elected politics.
What an unbelievable moment, Jay Martin.
Yeah.
The other governors sitting there with eyes wide open. And it kind of encapsulates the debate within the Democratic Party that I was discussing with Senator Booker. Do you take the gloves off? Do you try to work with Trump?
Yeah.
Do you sit back? What did you make of that moment?
Well, the fact that those governors are there in the first place tells you that those Democratic governors recognize they've got to work with him to some degree. But here's the challenge. You agree to work with him to some degree. You have a dispute that happens to be in public. He immediately threatens to stop all funding to your state and then lobs a political threat to you in the next breath. Therein lies the challenge. You have to work with him because you need, your state needs federal dollars. But if you don't work with him, he's going to threaten to cut you off.
So there's the policy of it, which I think you're right. Then there's the political question, which for Democrats, fundamentally, I think they just still haven't figured out quite how to navigate this yet. And so there might be different camps. And it would have been interesting, by the way, to have heard Governor Whitmer come on to justify the way in which she's been dealing or hasn't been dealing with the president, for example. But the Democrats can't figure out the right way forward. And as a result, right now, you've got all sorts of different approaches. I don't think Governor Mills' approach, by the way, is the one the Democrats want to take in the long run. Because clearly, in my mind, we had an election over this, and they lost on that referendum.
What about that point?
It's full employment for lawyers.
What really matters?
The legal profession is going to be very busy. Ultimately, if you're an elected governor, you have to do and say what is in the best interest of your own state. And some governors will choose one path, other governors will choose a more confrontational path.
Mel, we have about 30 seconds left. What are you hearing from Democrats about this debate?
Yeah, they haven't figured it out yet, right? Yeah. This is the debate that is going on right now. I think the leadership is much more cautious than what we saw from the governor, for example. But this is something that is going to play out in the weeks and months ahead.
All right, guys, great conversation. Thank you so much for being here. That is all for today. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be back next week because if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.
Previously. Now, Mayor Chuck Epsey said that the editorial unfairly implied that the city had broken the law with its meeting and cited another portion that questioned, have commissioners or the mayor gotten kickbacks from the community? So the judge ended up siding with the city, and here's the argument from the judge in the decision that was made. The court finds that the petition is well taken. The injury in this case is defamation against public figures through actual malice in reckless disregard of the truth and interferes with their legitimate function to advocate for legislation they believe would help their municipality during this current legislative cycle. First of all, proving actual malice is an incredibly difficult thing to do. How did this judge adjudicate that actual malice has taken place?
This is, like, I'm telling you, this is, okay, now I'm going to do the thing that the editorial did, and then they can go ahead and try to shut all of YouTube down if they like. So, is the judge somehow, does she know the mayor here?
Something's going on.
Because this is insanity. Do you know that the paper wasn't at the hearing? They weren't given a chance to defend themselves. Ironically, what happened was the paper didn't get noticed that the initial hearing was happening, the local city council meeting, etc. Then when they get sued about it, they didn't get noticed that they were supposed to be in court.
Yeah.
And so she rules that they had actual malice when she didn't even hear their case. That's nuts. I mean, at a bare minimum, that sounds like massive negligence.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, have I criticized the public official? And so should I now be punished and my rights taken away from me? No, that's not how this country works. We get to criticize them. And good news, Mr. Mayor, you get to say your point of view. You're the mayor of the town. You get to scream it from the rooftops.
Yeah.
You have every microphone in the world within that town. So what do you mean, no, you're not? And what's the core charge? That maybe they were influenced by money. You're going to ban anybody in media saying that politicians might be influenced by money?
By questioning whether that might be the case. It's not
not
It's literally
close.
not a statement of fact that, you know, it's not like they're stating something as fact that isn't fact. They're asking a legitimate question. But how could anyone be in favor of scaling back on government agencies that are full to the brim with unelected career bureaucrats who get to create, judge, and enforce their own policies and rules? How could this be?
A scathing review of the CDC, finding the agency repeatedly botched its pandemic response and failed to meet the moment of crisis. The CDC long under fire for its guidance on masking and vaccines over the last 2 years.
This is really confusing.
There are more than 10,000 chemicals and additives allowed in food in the U.S., often in small amounts, but many have not been evaluated by the FDA in decades. The majority are safe, but some chemicals allowed here have been banned overseas after research has linked them to cancer and developmental or behavioral issues.
Is the food industry basically policing itself?
I would say yes. 45% of the FDA's overall budget now comes from the companies it's reviewing, and 65% of the FDA's budget specifically for human drug regulation comes directly from Big Pharma itself.
The historic $2 billion payout by the U.S. Department of Agriculture to black farmers and other farmers of color who experience discrimination when applying to the USDA's farm loan programs.
The lender, who was a federal employee who was employed by a government, spat on me. I was called the N-word from this same official.
So I do a lot of work surrounding environmental justice issues here locally as far as activism goes. And I've done research fellow at the local EPA. The admin at the time when I was a research fellow were primarily comprised of people who were affiliated or directly coming from the Department of Defense. And they put in a lot of restrictions as to like what the researchers get to, which PFAS compound the researchers get to study.
Right. Is the EPA turning a blind eye to these dangerous forever chemicals, and why?
Unfortunately, the EPA is not turning off the tap of these chemicals from the polluters who knew they were poisoning their workers in the 60s and their neighbors in the 70s and ultimately all of us. And they're continuing to allow these polluters to send their PFAS wastes not only into our rivers, but to our wastewater treatment plants where then they are then sold to farmers who unknowingly contaminate their fields.
Whoopsies. Now, if you watch Beavis and Butthead on the Vanguard YouTube channel, which the majority report hilariously treats as some authoritative source, you'd think that TYT is totally in favor of the Trump administration gutting federal agencies. Except we're not. Two things can be true at the same time. These agencies have been deeply corrupted, do engage in waste, and should be reformed. But treating the federal workforce as if they're Twitter employees is a disastrous way to handle it, as we've been learning in recent weeks. But let's hear what Emma has to say about my on-air correction.
It is not the prediction. People make predictions all the time.
Right, I was wrong in my prediction about the election,
but
this
is not making
yeah,
like
right,
some type of
right.
poly market bet here.
Yeah.
With
That's
the
a
outcome,
mindset.
we can't tell.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was an abundance amount of evidence of this. And even if your opinion, not prediction, opinion was, I can't see them doing this is pretty radical. The idea that you would mock people for believing it and saying it was a conspiracy theory. The people had Trump derangement syndrome. I'm sorry, give me a break.
Apologies, I forget that Sam usually doesn't let Emma get a word in edgewise, but I'll address what she said in that video in a second. But before I do, did I, Sam? Did I mock voters who were worried about Project 2025? Because I don't remember doing that. What I do recall is chastising Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party for offering nothing to voters other than incessant fear-mongering about Trump. I also remember criticizing members of the media who simply regurgitated anything the Democratic Party claimed. I also found it fascinating that as the whole of the Democratic Party was engaging in said fear-mongering, they were also playing part in a massive cover-up about Biden's mental decline. I mean, just think about it. Democracy